Hello and welcome to www.luxurytolast.com. Today we're talking luxury watches and we're talking middle class, upper middle class watches. The luxury watch segment, if you look at the Time magazine or National Geographic from the 60s, 70s and 80s, was very much occupied by the middle class or upper middle class man and his aspirations. Have a look at these magazines and you'll see ads pitched at this person to achieve his aspirations through material objects. And two really big brands in the 70s for luxury watches, well, you couldn't go past Rolex. Rolex had that beautiful DateJust series, which was the versatile watch, which was a sports watch as well as being a dress watch. The other brand that really strikes a chord with 70s luxury watches is Cartier. Cartier in the 1970s really picked up its game. In the early 70s, Cartier released the Musty Cartier range. The Musty Cartier range was a revolutionary range of lifestyle type watches which were gold plated. And this was a first for Cartier because before this, all the Cartier gold watches were solid gold. Cartier also, at the middle class or upper middle class end, also had some. Now, I must say, a Musty Cartier is also a very middle or upper middle class brand as well. But the what I'm trying to allude to is in the late 70s, Cartier released the Cartier Santos in 1978. The Santos was a revolutionary watch because it was a sports dress watch to compete against the Rolex DateJust. And the Cartier Santos was a true Cartier, not a musty Cartier. And it was available in steel, two-tone, or solid gold. And the beautiful thing about the Santos series itself is that it accented the screws, something all watchmakers had tried to hide. The other thing about the Cartier Santos, it spawned another model, which was the Cartier Panther, which came out a year later. And the Panther itself was only available in quartz, but it had that sleek look to it. The bracelet was styled on the fur of a panther cat, so it was absolutely just class. As far as the two brands go, Rolex and Cartier, there were other brands that released steel items. Patek Philippe, Audemars Piguet with its Royal Oak. But those brands there tended to be upper luxury, so they're not quite in the same pricing segment. Mr. 70s trendy man, who's middle class, he may have wanted an Audemars Piguet Royal Oak, but he probably couldn't afford it. The Rolex DateJust was probably a bit of a stretch and was probably several $100s more than the wife would have allowed him to spend. But the two watches there, the Rolex DateJust and the Cartier, in hindsight, both watches now are considered a little bit small. But I don't think they are small. I think the DateJust from the 70s, so that would have been reference number 1601 in two-tone. So the 1601 was originally available as steel, two-tone or solid gold. 1601 became 16013 or 16014 when it became a quickset type date. And that model there changed in the late 70s, early 80s. It then became sapphire in the mid-80s. But a Rolex is such a versatile piece to have there. It's true iconic classic. The funny thing is, in Singapore, which is a very trendy Asian city, the two-tone version is less desirable than the all-steel version, which is funny because when you bought it new, the two-tone would have been considerably more expensive than the all-steel version. But these days, the two-tone version is considered an all-pex version, which is I hope I got my pronunciation right, an old man's or respected uncle's type of watch, whereas the steel is a lot more trendier. The funny thing is, if you're buying a second-hand Rolex in Singapore, you'll probably find the two-tone is cheaper than the all-steel. The interesting thing is, with watches themselves, is that the DateJust itself is still an iconic classic. However, with aspirational people these days, they tend to be buying a lot more sports watches. The same demographic who would have been reading National Geographic and Time magazine and very middle class, he now is really more into watches. He'd be very into Panerai, he'd be into the Rolex sports line, the Submariners, the GMTs, the Explorers. So they wouldn't necessarily be buying as many DateJusts. The DateJust is a great watch, very versatile watch. Cartier's had a bit of an interesting history too. The Cartier Santos was a fantastic classic which lasted through the 80s and 90s and even into the new millennium. The Panther, unfortunately, has seemed to have lost a bit of flavour because it's a quartz. It only ever came as quartz. Watch collectors suddenly have said quartz is no good, which is a great shame. Anything that was so popular, how could it turn so bad? It's kind of like Barry Manilow. I mean, was Barry Manilow's music that terrible now? I mean, he was so popular in the 70s, and this is the thing. I think people are genuinely stupid. And I think Cartier's Panther is a beautiful watch. I actually have one in my collection. My wife gave me that watch, and I think the Panther is just... I've got it in all steel. I think it just reeks of class. And I like to go against the trend. If something is so trendy, I've got to go against the trend. I can't follow trends. The interesting thing is that the Cartier Santos itself has been reinvented as the Santos 100 for a very modern time. It's over the top, it's big, it's large, and I kind of think that I've got a funny feeling that the original Santos may come back again in Cartier's future. The Panther is quite an interesting watch. For men, it's been dropped. The ladies' Panther is actually, they've combined the Santos and the Panther together to have one ladies' model, which is quite an elegant watch. So it's had an interesting history and an interesting time there. So that's the two luxury brands from the 70s and 80s, the Rolex DateJust and the Cartier Santos and Cartier Panther. Those two big makers, the watches from them are still design classics. Other brands from that time there, the Royal Oak. Well, the Royal Oak has grown into the Royal Oak offshore chronograph. It's gotten big, it's been put on steroids. I must say I don't approve of those changes to the Royal Oak, and I would always buy the traditional sized Royal Oak. Other brands like the Patek is timeless. The Nautilus, the Aquanaut, they're beautiful pieces. They've stood the test of time well. Other brands that have been there, a lot of them have disappeared or merged into other things. But I think myself, if you're looking for a great, beautiful piece from a bygone era, you can't go past a Rolex DateJust or a Cartier Santos or Cartier Panther. I hope you've enjoyed this comparison, and please don't forget to come to my website www.luxurytolast.com. Thank you.